Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of What I Watched This Month, July edition. I watched a disgusting amount of movies this month, so let's just get right into it. I started off the month by rewatching Raising Arizona. This is definitely not my least favorite Coen Brothers, it's not Hail Caesar, but it's definitely in that lower tier. It isn't a bad movie by any means, but it does the least for me. It's simply because I don't have a ridiculous amount to say about it compared to all of their other films. Nothing wrong with slow movies, but sometimes this takes its time a little bit more than it should. It's still super original and it's very Coen, so I can't complain too much. Then I rewatched Greener Grass. Now for the longest time I couldn't tell if I overhyped this just because I saw it at Sundance and everything is a lot funnier after midnight and it was also just very unique and fresh at the time. But no, I can confirm this is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen, if not the funniest. It's honestly a miracle that it works. It just throws so many funny things at you in such a short period of time. By the time the next bit is happening, you're still recovering from the last one. In short, I love it. Then I watched Oh Brother, Where Art Thou for the first time. This, on the other hand, is one of the better comedic films that the Coen brothers have made. I think it's pretty fun how this is based on Homer's Odyssey. In general, I think this is the epitome of a Coen brothers film, a story with clear steps, bizarre characters, and witty humor. George Clooney delivers a very goofy performance, and the music is, can I be honest, pretty catchy. So with all that being said, of course I loved it. Then I watched Spaceballs. This was kind of funny, I guess. I can't tell if I didn't love this because I'm not a huge Star Wars fan or if it's because I don't not like Star Wars enough. It really brings it home in the third act with the gags, but there's a solid chunk of this that doesn't even feel like it's trying to make any jokes, and at that point, what is the purpose? It's a so stupid it's funny movie, but you can only go so far with that style. Then I watched The Birdcage. Long story short, this is a movie about a gay couple that needs to pretend to be straight to get along with the parents of their son's fiance. Knowing this is written by Elaine May makes total sense because the screenplay is incredibly sharp and always pretty funny. As soon as you get familiar with the characters and overall vibe of the movie, you start to have so much fun with it. Thanks to a great performance by Robin Williams and a third act that you can't not have a good time with, this is a very fun movie altogether. Then I watched a much less goofy movie called Dead Man, directed by Jim Jarmusch starring Johnny Depp. After watching a lot of goofy movies, this was definitely quite the change of pace. I'm used to Jarmusch embracing a hazy atmosphere, and this did not hold back at all in that way. It was like watching an acid trip, but minus all the stereotypes that you'd think a film would do to achieve that. It takes everything a Western typically does to succeed and does the opposite, making for an experience you can't find anywhere else. As most of Jarmusch's films do, it made me feel stupid for maybe not understanding 100% of the purpose behind what it does sometimes, but that's not a bad thing, it just made me want to watch it again. Then I watched 3 Christopher Guest movies, For Your Consideration, Waiting for Guffman, and A Mighty Wind. My rank for them goes in that order. For Your Consideration is a goofy take on award season that is pretty funny in the moment but leaves your mind the minute it's over. Waiting for Guffman has some unironically great musical numbers and some heart to it that makes it hard not to enjoy. And A Mighty Wind may start a little slow, but definitely feels like the film that blends this style of humor with drama the best. Like, why did I almost cry? I think of all of his work, Best in Show is still the best, but if you're a fan of that one, I recommend checking these out as well. Then I watched The Living End, the earliest film by Greg Araki that I could find online. I wanted to get into Araki's work because he's one of the most iconic figures in the new queer cinema movement, and based on what I was hearing, he seemed like a really interesting filmmaker. The Living End definitely brought the punk style I expected it to. There's something very rebellious about the way he edits and the way he uses music that captures a darkness but also a sense of pride that I don't actually see in LGBTQ films that often. It was super unapologetic, and to be honest, I'm into that. Then I watched Araki's other film, Totally Fucked Up. This was definitely a lot more experimental than The Living End as far as structure goes, but it brought the same punk atmosphere, this time even stronger. I definitely feel like I get a better idea of what Araki is trying to tell me about him as a filmmaker in this one, but I don't see myself revisiting it that often. Then I watched Nightmare on Elm Street. I had a really fun time with this, almost too fun of a time considering how much I talked throughout most of it. That said, this is not the place you're gonna find a real well thought out analysis for this movie. I think it's a fun time, and that's the end of the road for me when it comes to this movie. This is definitely one of those where I'd appreciate it more in a packed midnight showing because I never felt tense or on the edge of my seat, just entertained. Does that count as a review? Then I watched Palm Springs. This is one of the few films of 2020 that a majority of people are really enjoying and watching, and how exciting is that? If I'm being completely honest, I think it deserves all the praise it's getting. Palm Springs is incredibly tight with what it chooses to tell, leaving no room for error. They do everything they need to do to make this idea work, and they pull it off. I can also appreciate how self-aware something like this is. Honestly, if there's a way to save modern comedies from consistently getting fucked critically, it's by bringing comedy into other genres, like sci-fi and action, stuff that feels like it takes itself way too seriously most of the time and needs some self-awareness. What I'm saying is Palm Springs feels like a breath of fresh air and exactly what we all needed right now. Then I watched Flubber. Sorry to all the Flubber fans out there, but this felt like it took 3 hours to get through, and that's all I'm gonna say about it. Then I watched Greg Gregg Rocki's most acclaimed film, Mysterious Skin. This left me in a weird emotional state for like a week and a half. I really can't say a film has been stuck in my mind for that long. I can't even say that about some of my favorites of all time. This movie is brutal in how it chooses to tell an already brutal story. To be violent with your filmmaking but innocent at the same time is incredibly difficult. You're balancing this film on a tightrope, and this thing pulls that off the entire way, building a character in a way that feels oftentimes careless, in a way that almost romanticizes what he does. But Araki patiently unravels these characters and their past in a way that feels incredibly fair to the subject matter. The choice to soak this film in shoegaze makes you feel nostalgic for a time you didn't experience yourself, which I think brings me to what this film achieves so perfectly, depicting the immortality of trauma, what it means to your past, present, and future. I could go on forever, but I will truly never forget about this movie. Then I watched 40-Year-Old Virgin. I'm sure this was great when it came out, but this was unfortunately not really my thing, and that's for two big reasons. One, it's way too long. 2 hours for this kind of film, definitely unnecessary, especially when a good portion of it is humor that either aged like milk or just fell flat for me personally. Which brings me to my second point, which is that none of this has aged well, and I don't feel empathy towards any of these characters. I feel like the only remotely enjoyable character was Paul Rudd's, who comes off a lot more creepy than he does funny. But yeah, because of what I literally just said that was proven wrong about an hour into the movie, he's actually kind of a creep. I really don't know what to say about this, it just wasn't my thing. Then I rewatched Popstar. I feel like I've talked about this a lot, and while I can admit this movie may be flawed and sure it isn't the greatest thing in the world, I can also admit that this is a perfect movie and is probably the greatest thing in the world. Just listen to the Osama bin Laden song and try to tell me otherwise. Then I watched Kelly Reichardt's Old Joy. This is my introduction to her films, and boy, it did not disappoint. While only clocking in at a little over an hour, this thing takes its time. If you were to boil this film down, it's really just about two buddies who go on a trip in the woods, but what it's really about is them coming to terms with their friendship now that both of their lives are changing so drastically. I love silence in a film, especially when it's done right, and Reichardt is a clear master at that. It all just felt very familiar, and with a soundtrack by Yo La Tengo, I ended up falling in love with this. Then I watched Ingmar Bergman's Winter Light. I like this for the same reasons that I love First Reformed, which felt inevitable, seeing as though First Reformed was heavily influenced by this to a point where it's a borderline remake. The troubled mindset of this priest is very universal and easily translatable, so it's not surprising that this film makes you feel pretty depressed by the time it's over, especially when you live in a time where it feels like, you know, the world is ending. Bergman's choice of dealing more with the people surrounding the priest was the biggest difference between this and First Reformed, and that's why I don't think I like it as much. I think it's just as impressive, but it didn't give me the out-of-body experience that First Reformed gave me. But regardless, it's a Bergman film, you know what I mean? Then I watched Taika Waititi's Hunt for the Wilder People. I really enjoyed this, and I think it totally accomplishes what it wants to accomplish. It got just the right amount of quirk, just the right amount of comedy, just the right amount of action, and you get what I'm saying. It's a very well-balanced film that is hard to not enjoy, but it also doesn't feel like it does anything to really make itself stand out as something bigger than what it is. Like, I see why people love this a lot, and I think it's a great movie, but I didn't have any takeaways that were bigger than a, hey, that was cute. Then I watched Tommy, that album movie for The Who's album under the same name. I'll come clean, I was never that into The Who, I only watched this because my buddy wanted to, and I'm glad I did. This is super bizarre, and honestly one of the most 70s things I've ever seen. Sure, it's stupid, and as a movie it doesn't really work at all, but I just want to live in Elton John's legs. I mean, just look at those. Then I rewatched Anomalisa, here we go. I didn't love it as much as I did the first time, but I do still enjoy it. I was very blown away by the mood it created the first time, and was so drawn into the visuals and surface level themes of loneliness that at the time I found to be very important to me, but since then I've done some growing and just don't see it as significant, nor do I think it tackles any of these themes with that much depth. It introduces a lot of ideas and then doesn't expand on them because it's got to deal with other ideas. And that's why I like Synecdoche, New York so much more. I think Charlie Kaufman gives himself the space to really expand everything he wants to talk about. Whereas with this, it feels like a mediocre execution that is presented beautifully but doesn't actually say much of anything. But hey, if you still love this film, that's you, man. Go eat a cake and celebrate, because that's the beautiful thing about movies, is everyone can have their own opinion. Isn't that great? Then I watched Journey to the West, Conquering the Demons, completely drunk off my butt. I'm kidding, who said that? This was consistently goofy and fun as hell, but I can't pretend like it doesn't peak in its first fantastic 20 minutes. Then I rewatched Toy Story 4 and loved it just as much as I did the first time. We can all argue what the best looking animated film is, but this has got to be the best animated film I've ever seen. Not the best animated film, just the best animated film, you know what I mean? The attention to detail is seriously unlike anything I've ever seen, if I'm being completely honest. And the themes of self-worth hit me just as hard the second time. I love it, I'm sorry. Then I watched The Killer, Fear and Desire, Lolita, Spartacus, and The Killer's Kiss to catch up for my Kubrick video. If you want my thoughts on those, go watch it. Then I watched Female Trouble, my first John Waters film. Losing my John Waters virginity was, I'll be honest, just as overwhelming as when I lost my actual virginity. I didn't know what I was doing, everything was really messy, it smelled kinda bad, and it was over way quicker than I expected. So if I'm comparing his work to sex, it's gotta be pretty good, right? I loved how filthy and unforgiving this was. It was never not interesting and always full of colors. So with all that being said, I'm sure I won't be shocked at all when I eventually watch Pink Flamingos, right? Then I watched Election. I have decided this is one of the best screenplays ever, and I love Paul. Fuck yeah, Paul.
I also like bananas.
Then I finally watched Before Sunset, and I absolutely loved it. I loved it even more than Before Sunrise. While Before Sunrise felt like a dream, this felt like reality, with the stakes being significantly higher as those two are both adults now. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, but the idea of these two falling in love and, you know, continuing is so much more thrilling in this. Linklater built it where whatever way they choose to go, it was gonna be heartbreaking regardless. And the way he sent us spiraling down the same tunnel that they find themselves in is beautifully realistic. Then I watched Before Midnight. Before Sunrise is like a dream, Before Sunset is like an action movie, and Before Midnight is a horror. I really enjoyed the realism of this and have no problem with how nihilistic this was compared to the other two, because that is what it is. I wouldn't have it any other way, and I think it's beautiful in that way. It just isn't as magical or as tightly wrapped up as I think the other two are. I also think it's a little irresponsible, because I don't like Jesse at all, personally, and if you do, you gotta rethink some things. And the fact that manipulation wins in the end left me kinda uncomfortable. I get that that's like part of the realism and how love is often too powerful to break through, but this movie literally makes a point for like an hour that Jesse and Celine should not be together anymore at all. And this movie feels like it's saying marriage comes with some bumps, and one of those bumps is emotional manipulation and abuse, and you just gotta overcome that. I don't know, I'm also pretty young, so who am I to say? What do you think though? Then I watched First Cow. I'm glad I watched at least one Kelly Reichardt film before this, because it definitely made me appreciate her use of patience a lot more. Even after talking about this on my podcast, I'm still trying to come to terms with what about this I specifically enjoyed so much. I mean, it's very soothing and cozy for the most part. It's just such a love letter to nature and all the little stories within it that we often take for granted. The cinematography is beautiful, the sound design is strong. There's very little wrong with this film, and the fact that it's not shoving the meaning of this story down the viewer's throats works in its favor. Then I watched Cry Baby, my second John Waters film. This is one of his more quote-unquote mainstream films, so it definitely felt a lot more accessible, but also still pretty bizarre. I can't say I've seen anything like it. For as stupid and flawed as this may be at times, I had a great time watching it. As soon as you take your hands off the steering wheel, everything becomes pretty hilarious. I'm gonna go on record and say this is the best Johnny Depp performance, without question. And there's a cameo from Willem Dafoe where he spanks Johnny Depp's ass. I mean, how could you give this anything less than 4 stars? Then I watched Jim Jarmusch's Night on Earth, a film about 5 different stories that happen in taxis from all around the world. I enjoyed this a lot more than Coffee and Cigarettes, and I'm only comparing because they're both anthologies by Jim Jarmusch. I found purpose and a unique voice in every story, which is something that wasn't as obvious to me when watching Coffee and Cigarettes. The first story with Winona Ryder in LA specifically just hit all the right notes. I mostly love how attentive each story is of the settings they take place in, utilizing the personalities of these cities rather than just using them as an excuse to tell the story in different places. As mentioned with Dead Man, when it comes to Jim Jarmusch, I usually feel like an idiot for not understanding something he's clearly trying to tell me with a lot of subtlety. But sometimes the point is that there is barely a point, I think, and I could write an entire essay about why he's doing that, but I'll just say he's doing it really well in this. Then I watched the theatrical release of Ingmar Bergman's Scenes from a Marriage. As mentioned in my Letterboxd review, I wish I had watched the 5-hour miniseries because the dramatic tension was too good to be cut down into 3 hours. Seriously, this is one of the most honest portrayals of a relationship that I think I've ever seen in film. The mask he's able to create in Liv Ullmann's character is so specific and truthful. Her performance as a whole captures a lot of the pain that I'm sure anyone would feel in this situation. The greater meaning it leaves you with in the end is also very different compared to most of what I've seen in films about marriage. I really enjoyed this, and I can't believe I'm saying this about a 3-hour film that consists of mostly conversations, but I'll probably be watching it again. And hey, that's what I watched this month. Thanks for watching, check out all these films and form your own opinions, and I'll see you guys in the next one.